point, I got a haircut, and then I had to turn in my Bernie card.
Yeah.
So the number one attack against me that Heidi St. John kind of rolled out, I guess months and months ago, has been that I am like a secret Democrat. I have been registered as a Democrat before in the past. Something called Operation Chaos by Rush Limbaugh basically encouraged Republicans to register as Democrats, especially if you lived in a blue state. Register as a Democrat and then vote for the weakest or the craziest Democrat to push them forward into the general, and then vote for the Republican candidate because it would clear an easy pathway for the Republicans. So I did this like starting in, I think, about 2008. I was in the military, joined the Army in '98, wasn't able to be politically active because I was in the military. I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh. My mom was a huge Rush Limbaugh fan, and she told me about this in 2008. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. That's like kind of behind enemy lines, special forces type of stuff like I do. So why not? I'll register as a Democrat. I never thought I was going to run for office and have people pick through my voting record and my voting registration record. So started that then. A couple different times I switched over to being like an independent libertarian. I initially, when I turned 18, I was a Republican. I voted for George Bush twice. I spent a lot of time in Iraq, and so I was pretty furious with the way that we've been lied to. And so I was kind of done with the Republicans. And the Republicans tried to run McCain, and I was not impressed with that at all. I kind of got in on the Ron Paul train around that time. But I kept my registration as Democrat because Rush was really pumping Operation Chaos hard because he wanted to prevent Hillary Clinton from getting the nomination. So the whole time I was in the military, I was stationed at Fort Lewis initially. I registered to vote in Pierce County. Back when Washington State used to register by party, I actually registered up there as a Republican to vote for Bush in 2000. But then when I moved to the East Coast, I re-registered, because in the military you can keep your home of record. So I registered and I'm from Portland originally. Registered back in Portland there, and I kept that registration until I retired from the military. I retired from the military in 2018, started working in the CIA as a paramilitary operations officer, but when I got out of the military, I had to register where I lived. I lived in Maryland, and I registered in Maryland as a Republican because Maryland actually has a Republican Party. In Multnomah County, Oregon, they don't have a Republican Party. So I was doing the Operation Chaos thing there, but then I still cared. I don't anymore because I've left Portland because it's absolutely a failed state. However, at the time, I did still vote in local elections in Multnomah County. And if you're registered as a Republican in Multnomah County, half the time you don't get to play because there's no Republican actually running. So when I got out of the military and I was living in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, the Annapolis area, there is a Republican architecture there. It at the time was ran by a bunch of rhinos, but a Trump-endorsed guy just won the nomination, which is pretty cool, in Maryland. So I registered there as a Republican. My late wife was killed fighting ISIS in Syria. I can talk about my backstory later on. In 2019, I moved back to Portland just to get my kids closer to my family. I had a brief opportunity before that to meet President Trump. This is kind of like some more of my backstory. And I started working right after that as an advisor to the Trump administration, but I started working heavily on the Trump 2020 campaign. I would speak out on behalf of President Trump's foreign policy, his treatment of veterans and military families. And so I was on the Trump 2020 campaign. In 2020, though, in 2019, as I was moving back to Oregon, President Trump was the nominee for the 2020 race, right? Because he was the incumbent. There was no challenger. So there was really no Republican presidential primary in 2020. So you get two votes. You get to vote in the primary, you get to vote in the general. If you're going to vote for President Trump in the primary when he already had the nomination, you're pretty much throwing your vote away. Like, it feels good, and we gave Trump 99% of the vote, but he had the nomination anyways. So when I got back to Portland, already working for the Trump team, I had already been vetted as a Trump surrogate. I went and I registered deliberately as a Democrat, and my goal was to get Bernie Sanders the nomination for the Democrat Party. And that is because Bernie Sanders cannot win in a general election. The Democrats can simply not steal enough ballots to get Bernie Sanders across the finish line. The Democrats themselves, they knew this, right? Because in 2016, Bernie beat Hillary. Bernie got the nomination. He should have gotten the nomination. In 2016, he won. They had to rig it against Bernie because the Dems knew Bernie couldn't win. From the campaign perspective, those of us I was at a very low level in the Trump campaign doing surrogate work, but we all assessed that Biden was the biggest threat because Biden was basically saying, hey, it's me, like I'm Obama's wingman, like everything goes back to normal, all this craziness in the country, the riots, the COVID, it all goes away if you just elect good old moderate old Joe Biden. That was his appeal to the American people, and it was fairly compelling. So our goal again was to get the guy that couldn't really get across the finish line, and that was Bernie Sanders. Now, some people will say that, hey, Bernie had already dropped out of the race by the time that the primary happened. That's not true. Bernie had suspended his campaign, but he remained on the ballot, so he could still take away votes from Joe Biden. And because Bernie knew that he won the last one, he could have dropped out, but he didn't. He stayed in this suspended state. So I opted to vote for him in an effort to get Bernie across the finish line. So that's it. Then in the general, I voted for Donald Trump, obviously, because I was working for the guy. So that's the Bernie backstory. Yeah, every now and again they'll bring up some quote where I say, hey, Bernie has a good point about a few different things. And Bernie, back before he completely and totally sold out to the Democrat machinery, he did used to, back in the day, back in 2016. If you go back and you look at 2016, there was more similarities between what President Trump was saying and what Bernie was saying than there was with what pretty much every other Republican that was on the stage in the primary with Trump. Before Bernie completely sold out and decided he wanted his lake houses, he used to talk about bringing back American manufacturing. He used to talk about preventing illegal immigration because it takes away jobs from American citizens. He's the one that famously says that open borders is a Koch brothers scheme. Koch brothers are some of the biggest conservative funders that are out there. They fund Jamie Hura Butler. They're the guys that are benefiting from shutting down our sawmills here in the Pacific Northwest. They're the ones that basically gutted out the Camas sawmill. So Bernie used to say some things like that. Every now and again, he'll make a decent stand. He also used to be very anti-war, which is really shocking to see the way that the far left, the populist left, has gotten rid of any kind of non-interventionist stance. They are completely neocons right now. The Democrat Party, lock, stock, and barrel of today, now has the same foreign policy of the Bushes and the Cheneys. If you look at the Ukraine aid package and all the escalation we've taken towards Ukraine, every single Democrat has voted for it. Only Republicans have rejected it. So what I will frequently do, I've done this a couple of different times, is I will say to Democrats on social media or ones I talk to, I'll say, look, if you are pro-American worker, which is what Democrats traditionally, that blue dog Democrats, they always sold themselves as the party of the American worker. If you're non-interventionalist, then you have no home anymore on the left. You have to come over here because you are America first. You may think America first means something it doesn't, but you are actually America first. If you look at the Bernie Sanders 2015, 2016 platform, and same thing with Tulsi Gabbard to a certain extent, that's all over here on the right now, and that's how we can actually bridge over and bring some people over to our side. So some of Heidi's criticism is that, like, I'm quoting Bernie Sanders or some nonsense like that, but nothing could be further from the truth. So that's the Bernie Sanders attack. Anybody have any questions about the Bernie Sanders stuff before I move on to the next, to starving grandmother and defunding the police? So right now, the reason why there's so many attacks coming out against me, they've spent about $2 million in the last week to 10 days specifically targeting against me. And the reason for this is because the establishment wants Jamie Hura Butler back in office. Jamie votes exactly how the corporate donor class and the Uniparty tells her to. If you look at Jamie's record, and we can go through it as much as you guys want, if you look at Jamie's record and you don't look at the R by her name, it's almost impossible to discern an ideology. Jamie's funded by some of the same people that are funding Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, all these types, because really there's the illusion of choice in Washington, D.C. You have Republicans and you have Democrats that essentially vote the same way. Keep our jobs shipped overseas, suppress working class wages, but the combination of offshoring and a combination of constant legal and illegal immigration, and then also the biggest scam, foreign policy and endless wars. Keep the military-industrial complex going. Jamie is 100% in favor of all those. So the Uniparty really wants Jamie Hura Butler to stay in office. She's been there for 12 years. She's on the Appropriations Committee. She knows every lobbyist in town. So they want Jamie to win. And their one way to get Jamie to win is dividing the Republican vote whenever she's challenged. Now, they anticipated that a bunch of Democrats, because Jamie took a stand against Trump, that a bunch of Democrats were going to vote for Jamie. However, Jamie's poll numbers have not been able to move up recently. Really, in the last 6 to 8 months, Jamie's numbers have been absolutely stagnant. She's been in third place in multiple different polls that we've had. And this is because the Democrats have been actually able to consolidate. So the Democrats, initially, there was just one guy in the race, Brent Hinrich, who I debated on a few occasions on Lars Larson, if you remember. And then another lady, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, entered the race. And she came in with a bunch of backing from local Democrat legislators in Vancouver. She got the endorsement of all the different county, the Democrat Central Committee county offices. And then the AFL-CIO also endorsed her. And then Brent did something very team player, very unifying. He dropped out and he endorsed Maurice. The Democrats consolidated. That automatically put the Democrats in number one for a minute, and then I surpassed them. I was in 2, they were in 1, and then I surpassed them. And now the Democrats and Jamie are tied in second place. And the establishment is putting plenty of money into Jamie, but they can't get her numbers to move. So their goal right now is to dump a ton of money into Heidi St. John. They've given her about $800K in the last 2 weeks. It's dark PAC money. They don't give it directly to her. They technically can't coordinate with her, but they spend it in favor of her. And if you look at how they're spending it in favor of her, they're doing 2 things. They're attacking me, for one, and then number 2, they're making it look like Heidi got the Trump endorsement. So you'll see the picture of Trump's face and Heidi St. John, America First, whatever, on there. Very deceptive, but it's all very legal. Whether or not Heidi coordinated with them or not, you guys can ask her. I think it's kind of a moot point. I don't think it matters. The reason why Heidi and I, and Wadi Akor for that matter, the reason why we all agreed to drop out and rally behind whoever Trump endorsed is for this very same reason right here. After Jamie voted for impeachment, January of 21, there was a bunch of us that stepped forward in February and said, hey, we're going to go after her. We all realized right up front that we would divide our votes and we would be doing the same establishment that we're all mad at. We'd be doing them a favor by dividing our votes. So that's why we all agreed publicly on the stage at the Clark County Candidate Forum that we don't drop out and rally around whoever Trump endorsed. Now, Heidi, for whatever reason, decided not to adhere to that. And if you look at the polling, it really hasn't reflected. She hasn't been able to break out of 4th place. Her fundraising's going like okay, but not competitive. You basically, to stay competitive against someone like Jamie, who started out with $1 million in the bank, who gets hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate PAC money every single cycle, to stay alive, you basically have to pull in over $300K per quarter. I'm the only candidate that's been able to do that to give me enough money to stay alive against this onslaught. She wasn't making that kind of money. She wasn't able to get any real endorsements. She wasn't able to pull out 4th place, but she did a key thing. She stayed in the race. And so now when the establishment can't get Jamie's numbers to move, they can use Heidi. They just juice her up full of funds and they attempt to take away somewhere between 5 to 7 points from me, and that's going to put me in 3, and that's going to put Jamie and a Democrat into the general, which is exactly what they want, because this district is R plus 8 or 9, some would even say 10 now in this cycle. And that basically means that Jamie gets reelected, because then we're all forced to that hostage decision. Do you vote for Jamie or do you vote for a Democrat? So that's very much what's at play here. Unfortunately, because I decided to stay in the race, now our district is being manipulated with dark money from the establishment, the same people who think that our voices don't count. This is how they actually stamp our voices out. They say, okay, you guys want your voices heard, like let's stamp those voices out. Let's just throw a whole bunch of money in there, flood them with news ads, flood them with mailers. So that's what's at play right now. I appreciate you guys all being out here to ask me questions and hear directly from me. But I would encourage you to hopefully tell your friends, hey, do some critical thinking, look at why they're going after this guy. The big reason why they're going after me is because they really hate President Trump's America First policy. In particular, when you start talking about deregulation, when you start talking about trade, bringing back American jobs, questioning endless wars, questioning the foreign policy establishment, of which I have a ton of experience, firsthand experience in. I could be very valuable on oversight committees, going after our intelligence community, going after the Department of Defense, the foreign aid racket. They don't want me there to do that. They're actually pretty scared of me. I have also refused to take any corporate PAC money from any of these major donors because it comes with strings. We've raised about $2 million, and that's all on individual contributions from people in the district and throughout the country, because of the media profile that we've been able to build up. So that means when I go to Washington, D.C., I'm only beholden to you guys. Right now, Heidi St. John, Jamie Herrera Butler, these folks, they have taken a ton of money, either accepted it or unwittingly have accepted it, and so they're actually owned by other people that are not in the district, and that's the problem, and that's why they fear me so much. So that's kind of the state of play. The Social Security attack, I'll just get to that real quick. Jamie said that I want to starve grandma, so she ran an ad saying that Joe Kent's talking about changing Social Security. So to be clear up front, if you're at retirement age, if you're approaching retirement age, I don't want to mess with the system. We owe you that money. The American people owe you that money. That's a contract that you guys signed in on. You paid in more than your fair share into Social Security. However, if you're my age or younger, I'm 42, we have to recognize that this system is going to go insolvent really soon. It's actually going to go insolvent in less than a decade. There was a projection done right before the pandemic that said Social Security is going to go insolvent, and we're going to have to cut everybody's rates or everybody's benefits between 20 and 25%. And that was before the pandemic, and the economy's only getting worse. So we're really looking at probably 7, maybe 8 years until Social Security has major problems. So we have an oncoming train. We see the lights, and what Jamie and the rest of the establishment are saying is everything's fine, keep sending us your money, which is what the government always says. So my point is that we have to start making some changes. In the short term, a solution for me is the Chinese Communist Party owes us reparations. We have a bunch of money that's tied up in U.S. capital markets that belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. We should simply seize that as reparations and use that to make Social Security above board, to put it back into the black. That's one option. Another option is that we take folks my age and younger and we do a blended system where some of your Social Security goes into a high interest, tax-free IRA account, essentially, that's managed professionally on Wall Street, that has your individual name assigned to it. Because right now the problem with Social Security is I started paying into it when I was 18. If I went to the Social Security office and I said, let me see Joe Kent's account, they'd be like, we don't have one. It's all just one big slush fund. That's the problem. Like, none of your individual names are on it. They just start sending you money when you turn a certain age. So the private sector would be much better stewards of that money. We'd get much more return on investment that way. I also think that for folks my age and younger, we do have to look at potentially raising the age for retirement. The current system is built around a life expectancy that, is like in the 70s maybe, but now people are easily living to be into their 80s. Now, I don't know what the exact number is, but I think we'd have to have like an actual national conversation about it, give people options to have a blended retirement. But that was my only point, is that our entitlement spending, in general, our fiscal policies are out of control. So that's what Jamie's attacking me on. But again, we're not going to change anybody who's on Social Security or approaching that age. We're not going to change the deal that they have with the government. So the other attack is that I want to defund the police. They took some clip of me.
Brother.
Yeah, they took some clip of me completely out of context. I want to defund sanctuary cities. So I want to defund Portland. I want to defund Seattle. I want to defund Kate Brown, Jay Inslee, because they're not enforcing any law and order. They're not cooperating with federal law enforcement. Portland kicked out ICE. It's one of the lead failing sanctuary cities that's a stone throw away. We're in the same metropolitan area as Portland. So what happens in Portland directly spills over here into not just Vancouver and Clark County, but the entire district. And same thing to a certain extent with Seattle and Olympia. And so me, as a congressman with control of the federal budget, I would just say, hey, we're not going to give any federal taxpayer dollars to these sanctuary cities and states until they start enforcing basic law and order. I would then take federal law enforcement grants and I would reward constitutional sheriffs with those federal law enforcement grants, because sheriffs, they're accountable to us. We actually get to vote on those guys. They're not faceless bureaucrats. They're actually elected officials. They have a lot of power. So constitutional sheriffs, I think, is where, until we can restore some common sense balance where these cities and these states are actually enforcing law and order, that's where the federal funding can go. I do want to start going after federal law enforcement. The Department of Justice, the FBI, Chris Wray, Mayorkas, A.G. Garland, like these guys, they're completely and totally out of control. Right now, the FBI and the DOJ is operating as a left-wing Democrat Praetorian Guard that's pretty much just used to go after and target conservatives. A lot of it started under Obama with the way that he went after the IRS, had the IRS go for the Tea Party. That morphed into Russiagate, where we saw the FBI, the CIA, the NSA all turn against private citizens who were just running for office. And then now with this January 6th narrative, we still don't know the full story behind January 6th, but with that narrative, they've taken federal law enforcement and they've weaponized it against the American people. They're not looking for terrorists. They're not looking for the next school shooter. They're looking for actual patriots that are going against what the government has to say, that are just expressing their lawful ability to protest what the government is saying, whether it's showing up at a school board meeting or whether it's participating in a peaceful protest. That's what the FBI is doing right now. So I think we need to have real reform right there. The forcing function for that real reform, for them actually taking us serious, is threatening to withhold the budget. Now, I think the FBI is very much needed. I think the FBI should be out going after Antifa and going after BLM. And going after real terrorists, not MAGA grandmas and people that show up at school board meetings. But if they're going to fail to do that, or they're going to stonewall us, then we say, fine, we control the purse strings. You're not actually adhering to your end of the bargain, and we're just going to withhold your budget. That doesn't mean I want to defund the FBI forever. An organization that I do want to defund forever, and Jamie quoted me right, is the ATF. The ATF is designed solely to infringe upon our Second Amendments. It is a completely needless federal bureaucracy that's just been weaponized against the American people. So she was accurate when I said I want to get rid of the ATF. I do want to get rid of the ATF. So that's the law enforcement shtick. I know that's got some people freaked out because defund the police is a hot button issue. The reason why Jamie had to go on the offensive with that is because we sent out a mailer and we ran a commercial against her that it's not an attack ad, it's just us laying out Jamie's record. That's the great thing about going against somebody with an abysmal record of 12 years, that there's all kinds of things to hit her on. So Jamie in 2020, when this country was being ravaged by Antifa and BLM and the left-wing media and the Democrats were pushing this narrative that all police officers are racist and they're just out there systemically shooting black people, Jamie jumped on with the Democrats and the far left and was a Republican co-sponsor of the George Floyd Walter Scott Notification Act, which thankfully didn't pass, but this is a very radical bill. This bill would have required police departments to report the racial status of police officers and whoever they used force against. If they failed to apply those racial quotas to the reporting to the federal government, those police departments would be defunded by 25%. So Jamie was literally part of a progressive left defund the police bill. She signed off on it. Again, thankfully it didn't pass, but no thanks to Jamie Rivera Butler. At the same time, Antifa was marching into our district, past Jamie's district office down there at Officer Row, assaulting citizens, vandalizing businesses. Jamie does nothing until it's time to vote with the Democrats to stop Trump from deploying federal law enforcement and the National Guard against the Antifa terrorists. So Jamie has an abysmal record of law and order. And I think one of her biggest sins of law and order is she voted to stop construction of the southern border wall. For the first 2 years of the Trump administration, America had just elected the build the wall president. We had Republicans and we had Democrats in the House and the Senate. We could have had the wall built. As a matter of fact, we paid to fund the wall. Republicans like Jamie voted to stop the construction. The joke's on us. We didn't get a wall, but also all the contracts were paid out. So all the material, I've been down there, it's just laying out in the desert, and now our border's absolutely under assault. There's been enough fentanyl pumped into this country from the cartels. The precursors for the fentanyl come from the Chinese Communist Party. Enough's been pumped into the country to kill every American somewhere between 2 and 3 times, depending on what stats you read. And that's led to a massive uptick of crime in the district. So Jamie is very, very much gaslighting and trying to deflect from her abysmal record. She's taking 1 or 2 statements I said and trying to deflect her abysmal record of law enforcement. So I think that that's like the 3 major hits that I've seen. But